Every eye in the restaurant turned toward him, the gatekeeper in an old suit. A phone screen lit up at the corner table, followed by snickers. Look at him. Does he really think someone would go on a date with him? Adam understood. The messages, the dinner, the candlelight, it had all been a prank. He stood up, trying to keep his voice steady amid the sneers. But before he could leave, a low, cold female voice came from the next table. He's the kindest man I've met tonight, and you are nothing but spoiled rich kids with no manners. The laughter died instantly. Only silence remained. No one realized the woman who said those words was the owner of the very building they worked in. 3 days earlier, Adam was still just the invisible gatekeeper at Silverline Tower, the gleaming skyscraper everyone looked up at, except him. He arrived earlier than the barista, bowed to greet everyone, broom in hand as he wiped down the glass doors, pains taller than any dream he'd ever had. Those hands once held blueprints for bridges, now they only held a rag and a spray bottle. High heels clicked past him. Everyone was busy, everyone looked right through him. Adam never complained, only smiled sometimes when a stray good morning came from someone new. Then came Scott Barrett, the company's communications director, the kind of man who used laughter as a weapon. He looked at Adam with that mocking glint, speaking loud enough for everyone to hear. "Mr. Clark, you know, if silence counted as a skill, you'd be the top expert in the field." Laughter burst out from the group of employees behind him. Adam just nodded, saying nothing. To them, it was amusement. To Adam, it was just another day. At noon, on the 45th floor, Scott's laughter echoed through the dining hall. He came up with his weekend entertainment idea. Blind date Friday. Each of us picks someone from the bottom of society and sets up a fake date. Whoever makes the funniest scene wins. A woman frowned. "That sounds a little cruel." "It's just humor. The world needs laughter," Scott replied, adjusting his tie with a smirk. When someone suggested the gatekeeper downstairs, Scott laughed out loud. Perfect. Honest face, quiet voice, looks like he's apologizing for being born. We'll make him think a woman's waiting for him at the city's most expensive restaurant. Catch his awkward reaction on video, it'll go viral. The group cheered, and within minutes, a fake message was created using an anonymous female account. That evening, Adam received the first text. "I often see you at Silverline. There's something about your smile I can't forget. Would you meet me this Friday at Levante?" He read the message over and over again. 6 years had passed since his wife's death, and no one had spoken to him with such tenderness since. He didn't quite believe it, but loneliness has a way of softening even the strongest hearts. At the corner of the table, Leah, his 8-year-old daughter, was drawing. She looked up and noticed the rare smile on her father's face. "Who texted you, Dad?" "Someone. Who says she wants to meet me." "Are you going?" "I don't know yet." "Go. Maybe she'll like your messy hair." Her innocent words made him laugh. Leah ran to the closet and pulled out his old suit jacket. "This one. You look like someone important when you wear it." He didn't say it out loud, but that was the very suit he'd worn to his engineering job interview, before everything fell apart. He took it in his hands, brushed off the dust, and for a moment, it felt like holding a piece of his lost past. At the same time, on the top floor of Silverline Tower, Alara Monroe, the founder and chairwoman, was wrapping up a long meeting. Scott Barrett stepped in, his voice so smooth it seemed to thicken the air around him. "I've arranged a private meeting for you. A potential partner, discreet, deeply admiring of you. You should give it just an hour." Alara was about to refuse, but Scott added, "This person prefers to stay anonymous for now, but I think you'll find it interesting." She glanced at her watch. Work pressure rarely allowed her a quiet evening out. A calm dinner at an upscale restaurant didn't sound so bad. "All right, just 1 hour," she replied coolly. Neither of them knew that dinner was a trap. One side was being deceived for laughter, the other for spectacle. And in just a few days, that cruel joke would leave an entire city speechless. A few days later, the trap was finally sprung, though no one had spoken of it yet. In the golden glow of Levante, the clinking of knives and forks on porcelain rang like cold, deliberate taps. At the center table sat Adam Clark, silent, the soft light reflecting off his old suit. One that fit him just right. Almost pitifully so. He didn't belong there. The waiters knew it the second he stepped through the revolving glass doors of Levante, a restaurant where even a glass of water cost half his day's pay. When he gave his name to the hostess, her eyes flickered with polite suspicion, the kind that was refined enough to feel cold. No one believed the gatekeeper from Silverline Tower could possibly be a guest. But Adam simply smiled, as courteously as if he'd long been used to entering places that weren't meant for him. The restaurant's light dripped down like honey from the ceiling. A piano played somewhere in the distance, making everything feel even more out of reach. He wondered if A truly existed. But then, the door to the private room opened, and Alara Monroe walked in. The woman's presence seemed to make the entire room stop breathing. Her brown hair was neatly tied back, her eyes bright yet cold, her steps decisive, the kind of poise that belonged to someone used to running the world. Adam shot to his feet out of reflex, nearly knocking over his water glass. "Hello, I'm Adam," he said softly, as if afraid to disturb the air. "Alara Monroe," she replied, her polite smile distant and composed. Neither of them knew they were sitting in a carefully staged meeting. She believed it was a potential business dinner, while he thought someone genuinely wanted to see him. The food arrived. Adam fumbled with the silverware, trying to recall tutorials he'd watched on how to hold a spoon properly. Alara noticed, tilting her head slightly, not out of disdain but curiosity. The man spoke gently, without boasting, without trying to sound clever. "You work at Silverline?" she asked. "Yes, in the lobby." "The lobby? I manage the entrance and assist guests coming in and out." Her breath caught at his answer. A long silence lingered before Alara smiled, not mockingly, but in surprise. She couldn't remember the last time she'd spoken to someone who wasn't tied to contracts, capital, or profit. "That sounds like a tough job," she said. "The easiest part," Adam replied, "is when no one can see you." The words made Alara pause. For the first time, she looked directly at him. In his eyes, there was no awkwardness of a man trying to impress. Only a quiet honesty, a kind of weariness too real to fake. In the dim corner of the restaurant, Scott Barrett and his crew were already set up. A phone on the table was recording, the tiny red light blinking steadily. Scott whispered each word between smug chuckles. "Unbelievable. They're actually talking. She doesn't even know he's the gatekeeper." Another voice cut in. "Post it. Everyone at the office is waiting." And within minutes, the live video of Blind Date Friday appeared on Silverline Tower's internal network, titled, "When the Gatekeeper Dates the Millionaire." Comments flooded in, laughing emojis, mocking icons. Someone typed, "Who let him into Levante?" Scott read each one, savoring them like victory. At the main table, Adam still didn't know. He was telling a small story about his daughter, Leah, and how she kept practicing drawing even with a broken pencil. Alara listened, her expression softening. There was something in the way he spoke, sincere, unpolished, that made her forget this was supposed to be a business meeting. When the waiter poured the wine, the light from the bottle reflected through the glass. And for a brief second, Adam noticed something strange. The light wasn't just coming from the wine, it flickered from the shadows, from a phone lens recording. He turned his head and saw Scott, that familiar face in a gleaming suit, pretending to text. His mouth curled into a smug half-smile. The group beside him snickered, shoulders shaking. Adam didn't need an explanation. He understood everything. His face burned. It felt like being stripped bare under the elegant golden light. He set his utensils down, his voice rough. "I'm sorry, there's been a mistake. I should go." He rose, the chair legs scraping softly against the floor. Alara looked up, startled. "Mr. Clark, what's—" She didn't finish her sentence before noticing Adam's glance toward the corner. Following his eyes, she saw them. Scott and his communications team smirking, phones raised, capturing everything. In that instant, Alara's expression changed. The calm composure of a business leader vanished, replaced by anger that burned like forged steel. She stood abruptly, the chair scraping back with a sharp sound that silenced the entire restaurant. Her heels struck the marble floor with cold, deliberate clicks as she strode toward the group. "Having fun, are we?" Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried through the room like a blade of ice. Scott forced a weak smile. "Just a little joke, Alara. You know us, no harm meant." She stared straight at him, her gaze cutting like glass. "A joke?" Then she turned to Adam, who stood frozen in the center of the room. "He's the kindest man I've met tonight. And you," her tone dropped, each word hitting like a hammer, "are nothing but spoiled rich kids with no manners." The entire restaurant fell silent. No more laughter, no more cameras. Scott's head dropped, his lips dry, while Alara turned back and gently took Adam's sleeve. "Sit down," she said softly. "Don't let them steal your dignity." Adam froze. He couldn't speak. He just looked at her. and in his eyes was a deep, quiet gratitude. Not only because she had defended him, but because in her gaze he saw the same loneliness he carried. In a world where everyone pretended to be strong, they had recognized each other, the gatekeeper and the millionaire, two people who had stopped believing in kindness until tonight. The scene ended, but the story didn't. Outside, Scott had deleted the video, too late. The clip had already spread, watched and rewatched by hundreds of employees, but no one was laughing anymore. Because at the end of the recording, Alara's voice rang out clearly, "The kindest man tonight." And just like that, the joke of the rich became their own verdict. That night, Adam couldn't remember how he'd even driven home. The city blurred past his window, streetlights flickering across his heavy face. When he unlocked the door to his small apartment, the clock on the wall was nearing midnight. Laya was still awake, curled up on the old sofa, her eyes lighting up when she saw him. "Did you have a good time, Dad?" she asked, her voice soft, as if afraid the answer might break the night apart. Adam hesitated, then forced a faint smile. She was very kind. Leah believed him instantly, pure and certain, the way only an 8-year-old could. She ran to him, wrapped her arms around his waist, and whispered, "I knew it. You deserve to be happy too." He only patted her head, saying nothing. After she fell asleep, Adam sat alone in the small kitchen. The weak yellow light fell over the suit he still hadn't taken off. On the sleeve, a dark red stain of dried wine had set, a mark clinging like an old scar. He stared at it for a long time, then let out a quiet, tired laugh. Maybe nothing in his life had ever truly stayed clean. He walked to the window and looked down at the empty street. The sound of cars faded into the distance, leaving only the quiet ticking of the clock. In his mind, Alara Monroe's image appeared, her eyes when she told him to sit down, her voice when she said, "Don't let them steal your dignity." Those words kept echoing, both a comfort and a wound. Because deep down, he knew he'd lost that dignity long ago, on the day the bridge he designed collapsed, taking 3 lives with it. He remembered it vividly. He had been the chief engineer then, young and ambitious. The bridge was nearing completion when the auxiliary support gave way during a heavy storm. The papers had a field day, the investigation dragged on, and in the end, the blame fell squarely on him. A miscalculation in structural design. He didn't argue. A family had lost their father. 2 workers died on the spot. He had stood there, drenched in rain, mud, and concrete, listening to the cries echoing from beyond the barricades. From that day on, he buried the title of engineer, left the company, and chose a job anyone could do, the gatekeeper. Across the city, in a mansion so wide and quiet it felt almost haunted, Alara Monroe was still awake. She sat on the long chair by the window, removing her earrings one by one, as if taking off the mask of power she wore during the day. In the corner of the room, a piano sounded. Not a melody, just a few lost notes, pressed by accident. She turned. A blonde-haired boy sat before the piano, his hands resting lightly on the keys but not moving. Finn, her son, his eyes were empty. He hadn't spoken in nearly a year, not since his father, her husband, died in a plane crash. Alara walked over and sat beside him, placing a gentle hand on his small shoulder. "That's enough for tonight, sweetheart. It's late." Finn didn't respond. He simply lowered his hands and walked out of the room, slow and quiet as a shadow. She watched him go, her heart sinking. When her son's door closed, Alara leaned her head against the back of the chair and shut her eyes. The image of the man from the restaurant returned, his honest, uneasy eyes, not weak, but quietly resilient. She still remembered his words. "The easiest part is when no one can see you." A gatekeeper had said something that somehow reflected her own truth. Because even though the whole world saw her, she still felt invisible. In front of her stood a silver-framed photograph of her husband. She reached out, brushing away the thin layer of dust on the glass. The accident had happened when his plane was en route to inspect the collapse of a bridge, the very first project her company had invested in. The official reason: technical malfunction. The report's conclusion: the fault lay in the design team. An engineer had been negligent in safety inspection. From that day on, Alara had never trusted another engineer. She cut all infrastructure projects and shifted her empire toward financial technology, a world where numbers replaced people. She once said in a board meeting, "The only thing that never betrays you is data." But tonight, staring at her reflection in the mirror, she realized that her coldness had only ever been a mask, a shield against the fear of losing someone again. In the same city, wrapped in the same silence, Two people sat in different places, each carrying a wound that time itself could not reach. Adam closed his eyes, listening to the steady breathing of his daughter in the small bedroom. Alara stared up at the ceiling, hearing the clock tick through the emptiness. Neither of them knew that their pasts had once crossed. The bridge project that claimed 3 lives was the very first investment Alara had ever funded. The accident report from that year bore the name of the chief engineer, Adam Clark, but she had never noticed. And he, lost in crisis, had never thought of the name of the lead investor, the woman who lost her husband in a plane crash on the same day the bridge he designed collapsed. Fate had hidden that thread well, waiting until both of them believed they had survived their tragedies, only to gently pull them face to face once more. Outside, the rain began to fall softly over the city. In the small apartment, Adam placed his wine-stained jacket into a basin of water, watching the red color fade and swirl like dissolving memories. Across town, Alara turned off the light, leaving only the faint glow of a bedside lamp reflected in her husband's framed photo. Two strangers, both carrying unhealed scars, were slowly moving toward each other. Not out of love, but because of a shared wound still yearning to be healed. That weekend, the city sky was unusually clear. Alara drove to Silverline Tower, the headquarters of her company and also where Finn was scheduled for his therapy session on the 12th floor. The boy sat quietly in the back seat, eyes fixed on the window, fingers intertwined in his lap. Alara glanced at him through the mirror and sighed softly. 8 months had passed since the accident, and Finn still hadn't spoken a single word. When the elevator doors opened on the ground floor, Finn tugged at his mother's sleeve and pointed toward the lobby. There, a little girl was sitting on a waiting bench, her legs swinging, a thin comic book in her hands. Her brown hair was tied to the side, and her cheeks glowed pink under the sunlight. She looked up, caught Finn's gaze, and smiled, a bright, effortless smile, as if they'd known each other forever. "Do you want a cookie?" the girl asked, holding out a small one wrapped in a napkin. Finn didn't answer. He just looked at her for a moment, then gave a shy nod. Leah grinned and carefully placed the cookie on the table beside him. "If you don't like chocolate," she whispered, "there's vanilla too." Alara stood a short distance away, frozen in place. It had been so long since she'd seen Finn nod at anyone, not even his therapist. He held the cookie tightly in his hand, not eating it, just keeping it close. Then Adam appeared. He walked through the main doors, his uniform carrying the faint scent of car exhaust. When he saw Alara, he stopped, a flicker of surprise crossing his eyes. She too looked momentarily unsure. She hadn't expected to see him here. "Good morning, Miss Monroe." "Good morning, Mr. Clark," Alara replied, her voice gentler than before. Leah ran up and took her father's hand. "I was talking to my new friend. His name's Finn. He doesn't talk, but I think he understands everything." Alara glanced over to see the two children sitting on the tiled floor, using white salt to draw the shape of a crescent moon. Leah chattered cheerfully, while Finn stayed quiet, though his eyes gleamed with focus. When Leah finished, she dipped her finger into the salt and flicked it gently, scattering tiny grains into the air like stars. Finn laughed, just a small sound, but real. That sound made Alara freeze. She had almost forgotten what her son's laughter sounded like. And now it echoed softly through the lobby. Not because of a doctor, not because of medication, but because of a child's simple game. She turned to Adam, emotion clear in her eyes. "What did you say to him?" Adam shook his head. "Nothing. I just sat beside him and listened to Leah talk. Maybe he just needed someone to listen." Alara looked at him for a long moment. This man, with his modest job and a past she didn't yet know, had somehow reached the part of her son no one else could. There was something in his voice, something steady and kind, that made her feel a quiet sense of safety, a feeling she hadn't known in years. When Finn finished his therapy session, he didn't want to leave right away. Leah grabbed his hand, tugging him toward the lobby. "Come play tomorrow, okay? I've got a really cute tabby cat at home." The boy turned to his mother, as if asking permission. Alara smiled softly and bent down to whisper, "If you want to." Finn nodded. Before leaving, Alara stepped closer to Adam. "Thank you for today." "It's nothing, Miss Monroe. The kids did all the work," he replied with a modest smile. She hesitated for a second. "Tomorrow, if you're free, you could bring Leah to my house, just so the children can play." Adam paused, uncertain, as if afraid to cross a line, but Leah stood beside him, eyes pleading. "Please, Dad, I want to show Finn our tabby cat." He exhaled softly, then nodded. "All right, if you don't mind. On the contrary, Alara said, her tone gentle. I'd be glad. The next afternoon, Adam and Leah arrived at the Monroe estate. The house stood in a quiet suburb, surrounded by a perfectly trimmed garden and a pond that mirrored the blue sky. Leah dashed off after Finn, their laughter echoing across the yard while Adam lingered on the porch, feeling slightly out of place. Alara greeted them, for the first time, not in a tailored suit, but in a simple dress. The atmosphere was gentler than Adam had expected. Leah and Finn played under the shade of a tree, using dry branches as their spaceship. Finn drew the moon in white chalk across the stone tiles. He laughed more than before, sometimes glancing at Leah as if he wanted to tell her something. Alara sat near the window, watching her son. Every now and then, her gaze drifted toward Adam, who was kneeling beside the children, helping them prop up their spaceship made of cardboard boxes. The scene was so peaceful it felt unreal. To Alara, it was a small kind of miracle. For so long, the mansion had known only the sound of turning pages and ticking clocks. Today, it had laughter. When the sun dipped low, Adam stood and politely excused himself. Leah waved goodbye, and Finn hesitated. Then, to everyone's surprise, lifted his hand and waved back. Standing by the doorway, Alara said softly, I think he's starting to come back. Thank you. Adam smiled faintly. Maybe they just helped each other remember how to smile. In that moment, she saw something in him. Not pity, but genuine understanding. Two worlds that seemed impossibly far apart were suddenly connected, through two children and through something utterly simple, kindness. That night, when Alara opened her laptop to work, her inbox was flooded with messages. The subject lines repeated over and over, the millionaire and the gatekeeper. The video from their dinner had leaked. She clicked it open. There was Adam, in his old suit, his eyes uneasy under the restaurant lights. Then came the clip of her standing up, saying, he's the kindest man I've met tonight. It lasted barely 2 minutes, but it had spread like wildfire. The comments were split in two. Some called her a woman with a heart of gold. Others sneered, calling it a cheap PR stunt. Scott Barrett, the man who started it all, seized the moment. He gave an internal interview, claiming he only wanted to create some lighthearted fun and never expected it to turn into a celebration of compassion. His words made Alara's skin crawl. On the other side of the city, Adam watched the same clip on his old phone. Leah sat beside him, giggling. Dad, you're on the internet. He shook his head lightly and turned off the screen. What mattered more to him wasn't that video, it was the image still fresh in his mind. Leah and Finn laughing together that afternoon. Real laughter, with no cameras, no mockery, no audience. The two children had done what adults couldn't, turned silence into connection and pain into warmth. Their small world was quietly changing the world of the grown-ups around them. That afternoon, sunlight streamed through the leaves, scattering patches of gold across the marble floor of the living room. Finn sat on the rug, a box of colored pencils and a blank sheet of paper before him. Adam sat across from him, while Leah lay on her stomach beside them, chin propped on her hands. Today's game was guess the feeling through a drawing, Leah's idea, and also a gentle way for Finn to communicate without words. It's your turn to draw now, Adam said, his voice warm and unhurried. Finn nodded, picked up a blue pencil, and began to sketch curved lines stretching across two riverbanks, above them a rising sun. A bridge. Adam looked at the picture, silent for a long time. Then he spoke softly, his voice roughened by memory. Sometimes the bridge between two worlds can collapse, but we can always rebuild it if we have enough courage. Alara stood at the doorway, listening, her heart tightening. Those words, every single one, were the same her husband had said before boarding the plane to inspect the site where the Harbor Rise Bridge had collapsed. If that bridge can stand, it will connect both sides of life. He never came back. Alara stepped back slowly, trying to steady her breath, but when her eyes fell on Finn's drawing, the bridge, the sun, the tangled lines of crayon, her pulse began to race. She knew she had to find out the truth. That night, after Adam and Leah left, Alara sat before her computer. She typed the name Adam Clark. The first line of the search results made her chest tighten. Chief Engineer, Harbor Rise Bridge Project, 2016. She opened the old news articles one by one, photos of the broken bridge under the rain, headlines shouting, 3 dead, Chief Engineer Adam Clark suspended. Her hands trembled so badly the cursor slipped off the screen. The room seemed to spin. Her husband had died in the plane crash while flying to the accident site, the very bridge that had just collapsed. That double tragedy had haunted her for years. And now, the man who had made her son laugh was the same man who had designed that bridge. She couldn't sleep. The entire night, she sat in the living room, watching the streetlights smear across the window glass. By morning, when Adam arrived with Leah, she was still standing on the porch, her face cold, distant, nothing like the woman he'd met before. "Ms. Monroe?" Adam said gently. "Leah made some cookies for Finn." "Are you an engineer?" Her voice came suddenly, sharp, trembling. Adam froze. "I used to be." The Harbor Rise project? The air seemed to drain from the space between them. He didn't ask how she knew. He only lowered his head and said quietly, "Yes, and because of that, I'm no longer an engineer." Alara stepped back, her voice cracking with anger and grief. "Did you know my husband died because of that? Did you know his plane crashed on the way to your site, the site of the bridge you designed?" Adam's eyes fell to the ground. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I only know that I was wrong, and the price for that mistake is the rest of my life." She broke down, unable to hold it in any longer. 8 years of bitterness and blame came pouring out at the man standing before her. "Do you have any idea how much I've hated engineers like you? People who make mistakes that cost others their lives and then keep on living as if nothing happened." Adam didn't defend himself. He just looked at her, eyes weary but steady. "I don't live if nothing happened, Ms. Monroe," he said quietly. "I live trying to make up for it. Every day when I open doors for people, I think, if I can do even one small thing right, maybe, just maybe, the weight of what I did will be a little less." Alara sank into the nearest chair, tears streaming down her face. In the chaos of that moment, Finn ran in and saw his mother with her head in her hands. Fear flashed across his small face. He rushed over and grabbed her hand. Then, for the first time in 8 months, a voice, trembling and small, broke the silence. "Mom, don't cry." Alara froze. She lifted her head slowly and stared at her son. He was shaking, lips quivering, but his eyes were clear and bright. "Mom, please." That simple voice seemed to awaken the entire room. Alara broke into louder sobs, wrapping her arms tightly around her son. Adam stood still, his eyes red and glistening. Leah ran in from outside and gently took Finn's hand. "See, I told you you could talk," she said softly. Alara looked up at Adam through her tears. "Do you see?" she whispered. "It was you. You made him speak again." Adam shook his head. "No," he said quietly. "It was your love that brought his voice back. I just happened to be there when it happened." The silence that followed felt different, not heavy, but cleansing. The anger was gone, replaced by exhaustion and a strange peace. Alara understood then. The truth might shatter everything, but it also gave her back something she'd lost, the belief that pain wasn't meant for revenge, but for forgiveness. That afternoon, the Monroe mansion was busier than usual. Scott Barrett and several Silverline employees arrived for what they believed was a charity meeting Alara had called. No one knew what she was truly planning. They entered, still carrying that quiet arrogance of people who believed themselves untouchable. Scott forced a polite smile when he noticed Adam in the room. "Well, if it isn't our internet hero," he said with a smirk. Alara rose to her feet, cutting him off with a calm yet firm voice. "Before we begin," she said, "there's something I need to say." The room fell silent. She looked straight at Scott, then swept her gaze across the room. "You laughed at a gatekeeper," she said, her voice calm but unwavering. "You turned him into a joke, but that same man saved my son. Without him, Finn would still be silent. Without him, I would still be trapped in hatred." No one dared to breathe. Scott's head dropped, his face pale. Alara continued, her tone steady but filled with emotion. "We take pride in the towers we build, but we forget that people are the true foundation. And today, that foundation is Adam Clark." For a moment, the room stayed silent. Then a single pair of hands began to clap, the elderly housekeeper standing near the door. One by one, others joined in, until the sound of applause filled the hall. Adam bowed his head, his voice trembling. "Thank you, but I only did what any decent person would have done." Alara met his eyes, her own glistening. "No, Adam," she said softly. "You did what many with far more power would never dare to do. You faced your mistakes and still chose to live with kindness." Scott was dismissed the very next day. The Blind Date Friday video was wiped from every system. But what people remembered wasn't the firing. It was the moment Alara spoke during that meeting. "He's the kindest man I've ever met. And if this world had just a few more people like him, we wouldn't have to teach our children how to say sorry." The lines spread everywhere, not as a scandal, but as a wake-up call. And for Alara, It did more than save her son. It saved her own soul from the depths of resentment. A month later, the city's sky had returned to calm after the storm of public attention. Inside Silverline Tower, a new announcement appeared. Adam Clark, Community Advisory Lead, Bridge of Second Chances Project. It wasn't a grand title, but for Adam it was something he'd long believed he would never have again. A chance. Alara had written the nomination herself. When the board asked for her reasoning, she'd simply said, "He understands people better than any engineer I've ever met." That one sentence was enough to silence the room. Adam accepted the job with his usual humility. He didn't see it as a reward, but as a second chance. This time, not to rebuild with blueprints, but with heart. Every morning, he arrived at the construction site early, talking with the workers, asking what they needed, what worried them, and taking careful notes. "This bridge will connect two shores," he said, "but it'll also connect people who stopped believing in one another." Finn and Leah still met every week. Together, they started a small neighborhood group, taping up a handwritten sign that read, in uneven letters, "The Silent Speakers Club, a place where everyone can be heard." The kids gathered in the park to draw, tell stories, or sometimes just sit quietly together. Finn still didn't talk much, but his eyes were brighter now, and Leah was always there to speak for the children who hadn't yet found their own voices. Alara watched them play, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She no longer tried to erase the past. Instead, she was learning how to let it live beside her without hurting anymore. Each morning, when she walked through the company gates, she saw Adam, still bowing politely to everyone who passed. Only now, everyone bowed back. The day of the new bridge's inauguration came faster than she expected. It stood over the eastern sea, curving gracefully like a ribbon, catching the sunlight and scattering gold across the water. On its plaque were the engraved words, "Bridge of Second Chances." Guests lined both sides of the walkway. Alara, dressed in a pale blue dress, stepped up to the podium. The sea breeze lifted her hair as the microphone came alive with a soft crackle, and the crowd fell silent. 8 years ago, she began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "A bridge collapse took from me the person I loved most. I thought I would never trust the people who build bridges again. But then, one day, I met a man, not an engineer, not a man of success, but someone who had the courage to live with kindness, even while carrying his own mistakes." She looked toward the seats below, where Adam stood beside Leah and Finn. "I've learned," she said, "that people may laugh when you fall, but only those who've risen from pain themselves can truly understand the value of kindness." Applause rippled through the crowd like waves. The wind carried cheers mixed with the quiet sobs of those who knew the story behind the bridge. Adam didn't look around. He simply smiled. In his eyes, the past was no longer a heavy shadow, but a gentle reminder that every bridge, no matter how broken, can be rebuilt if one has the courage to begin again. After the ceremony, when the guests had gone, Alara and Adam remained by the railing. In the distance, Finn and Leah ran across the new bridge, their laughter echoing through the golden afternoon. The water below caught the sunset, turning it into a ribbon of shimmering red and gold, like a faint rainbow stretching between shores. Alara spoke softly, her voice barely above the breeze. "This bridge doesn't just connect two sides of the sea." Adam nodded. "It connects two people who thought they'd lost all faith." She looked at him and smiled. "And two children who reminded us that the best things in this world still exist." He nodded. "The world can be cold," he said quietly, "but as long as we still listen to one another, there will always be light." Finn and Leah turned back, waving and shouting, "Dad! Mom! Hurry up! Come see the sunset!" Adam and Alara walked forward, standing side by side. The sun sank slowly, spilling gold across the bridge like a river of light. The four of them, 2 adults, 2 children, stood there in the sea breeze and the glow of dusk, as if every fracture of the past had finally been mended. On the bridge named Bridge of Second Chances, the light shimmered not only on the water below, but in their eyes, the eyes of those who had once fallen, now standing together, proving that kindness will always be the strongest bridge across the sea of the human heart.